The debris field was still cooling when I found her. We had come in on a salvage vector, 3 of us from the 9th Forward Medical Unit, tracking the wreckage signatures of the Imperial fleet that had been destroyed somewhere above the moon's northern pole. Command wanted survivors if there were any. Intelligence wanted anything recoverable from the flagship's navigation core. Neither group expected much. When a Varinthian fleet dies, it tends to die completely. Corporal Yates was the first one through the hull breach. He swept his light across the corridor and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, that there was no point going deeper. I told him we hadn't cleared the command tier. He said the command tier was a hole in space. I told him I'd go alone if I had to. He let me go alone. The flagship's interior was the kind of quiet that only happens after catastrophic loss. Emergency lighting, red and dim, pulsed along the floor at long intervals. Conduits had ruptured and refrozen in the vacuum near the breaches, forming pale, crystalline formations along the corridor walls. I moved slowly, checking each compartment, finding nothing but the evidence of how completely and quickly everything had ended. Varinthian crew, 6 of them in the first corridor. Another 4 past the bulkhead. They had not had time to run. I almost turned around at the secondary command antechamber. Something made me open the interior door instead. She was seated against the far wall, below the destroyed navigation console. Not on the floor exactly. One of the crash restraint panels had partially deployed and was holding her upright in a way that might have looked deliberate if you didn't look closely. If you looked closely, you could see the angle of her left arm and the dark stain that had spread from her side across the floor, and the stillness of her that was not the stillness of sleep. But her eyes were open. I crossed the room in 8 steps. I didn't think about it. I was already pulling my medkit from the side pouch before I'd finished processing what I was seeing. She was Varinthian. That much was unmistakable. The bone structure of her face, the slight iridescence at the temple and along the jaw where their neural lattice ran close to the surface, the silver gray of her skin that caught my helmet light and gave it back in faint patterns I had no name for. She wore a commander's plate across the chest, dark and ornate, engraved in a way that military armor usually isn't. And around her neck, half hidden by the collar of an inner robe that had been torn at the shoulder, there was a chain with a seal on it. The kind of seal that Varinthian officers don't wear. The kind that their royalty do. I set that information aside and found her pulse. It was there. Slow and uneven and working very hard, but there. I said quietly, "I'm going to help you. Don't move." She did not move. Her eyes tracked to me and stayed, and I could not read them. Varinthian pupils are wider than human ones, and in the red emergency light, they were very dark, and whatever she was thinking was somewhere behind them, private and intact. The injury to her side was bad. Internal, mostly. The kind of thing that took time and patience and the right compounds, and I had 2 of those 3 things. I worked without stopping. The med foam first, then the pressure wrap, then the coagulants that were at least close enough to compatible that they slowed the bleeding. I talked while I worked. Nothing important, just a low voice so she knew I was still there and still deliberate about it. Field medics learn that silence feels like abandonment to someone in pain. My comm crackled around the 20-minute mark. Yates, from outside the hull. He said that they'd gotten what they could from the secondary NAV arrays, and that the scouts from the 3rd Enemy Patrol had doubled back and were running a sweep of the debris field. He said we had maybe 15 minutes before they crossed our position. He said they were coming back to the ship to evac. I said, "Go ahead. I am staying." There was a pause. Then Yates asked me if I understood what I was saying. I said I did. I told him to mark my position and file a retrieval request when he got back to the forward line. He started to say something else, and I told him I'd see him in a few days and switch to the private channel so he couldn't talk me out of it. I don't know exactly why I made that choice. I've thought about it since. The honest answer is that there wasn't much choice in it. She was alive, and she was alone, and leaving felt wrong in a way that I didn't need to reason through. Some things you know without needing to examine them. I kept working. By the time the patrols had swept past, and they did sweep past, close enough that I heard the vibration of their ship through the hull. She was breathing more steadily. The coagulants had done their job. The med foam was holding the deep tissue together well enough to buy time. She wasn't out of danger, but she was further from the edge of it. Around the third hour, she said something. I looked up. She was watching me with those wide, dark eyes, and she had said a word in Varinthian that I didn't have. I shook my head and said I was sorry, that I didn't understand. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the trade tongue that most of the frontier world shared, "Why are you still here?" I thought about it. I said, "Because you're here." She considered that. "My ship is destroyed. My crew is gone. There is nothing here to salvage." A pause. The humans I have encountered did not stay in places where there was nothing to take. "I'm not those humans," I said. Another pause, long enough that I thought she might have drifted. Then she said, "I'm aware of that." I finished rechecking the pressure wrap and sat back against the wall beside her, close enough to monitor her vitals on my wrist display without hovering. The emergency lighting pulsed. The debris field outside made occasional sounds against the hull. Small things, nothing structural. She said, "You know what I am." It wasn't a question, so I didn't treat it as one. I said, "I know you're alive. That's what matters to me right now." A long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, and for the first time, there was something in it that was not composure, maintained by will. Something that had been held tightly for a very long time and was deciding, carefully, whether to trust the dark. "They were all mine," she said. "Every one of them. I watched them go. A breath. A queen is supposed to outlive her grief. I have read that in every text they gave me as a child." She paused. I did not think those texts were written by someone who had actually done it. I said no. I don't think they were either. We were quiet for a while. The kind of quiet that isn't empty. Eventually she asked my name. I told her. She said it carefully, as though learning the shape of it. Then she said her own name, the real one, not the title, the one that the texts don't record, and I understood that it was something she didn't offer without meaning to. I said it back, the same way she had said mine. Retrieval came 14 hours later. A two-man scout runner, running dark and fast along the debris shadow, guided in by the beacon I'd left on the hull. The medic who came through the breach took one look at the situation and started asking questions that I didn't have time to answer because there was a queen who needed a proper surgical bay and not a conversation. We got her there. I was in a field station 3 days later, writing the incident report, when the adjutant came in and said I had a visitor and looked as though he wasn't sure what to do with that information. I set the report down and went to the door. She was standing in the corridor. Not in the robe she'd been wearing when I found her. Those had been cut away somewhere in Tria. She wore something simpler. She was standing without help, which meant she was recovering faster than I'd expected, which meant she was, in the Varinthian way, probably pretending to be further along than she actually was. She looked at me for a long moment. Those wide dark eyes, clear now in proper light, reading something in my face that I couldn't see. Then she said, very quietly, "You stayed." I said, "Yes." She said, "I have thought about that for 3 days." "What means?" "That someone stayed." Her voice was even, but her eyes were not quite, and I thought about the text that had been written by people who hadn't actually done the thing they were describing. I thought about the 14 hours in the cooling wreck, and the way she had said her name like it was something she kept close. I said I'd stay again. She looked at me for another long moment. Then she said, "I know," and the way she said it made me understand that she did not mean it as a small thing. She reached out and put her hand briefly over mine. Just a moment, the lightest pressure, the oldest recognition, and then she walked with me back toward the light.